It is my pleasure to welcome everybody to the Breslin Center event, the past, present, and future of retail on Long Island. I am Ashira Ostrow. I'm the Executive Director for the Wilber F. Breslin Center for Real Estate Studies at Hofstra Law School. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We would ask everybody to please keep your videos turned off and your microphones muted throughout the program. And I also encourage you to submit questions using the chat function. We will have time for Q&A towards the end of the program, and I will be happy to answer as many of those questions as we can get to. I mean, I will be happy to ask the panel as many of those questions as we can get to. So with that, I have the privilege of introducing the Dean of Hofstra Law School, Judge Gail Prudenti. And Judge Prudenti has accomplished an astonishing amount as Dean of the Law School. And one of her I think most successful accomplishments was bringing the Breslin Center under the auspices of the law school, where I believe it has flourished and continues to grow with the participation of all of you and members of the community. And I'm delighted to say that we're not surprised by Judge Prudenti's accomplishment. She has distinguished herself throughout her career as an esteemed member of the judiciary and as an exceptionally talented administrator. And so for those who don't know, before Dean Prudenti was Dean Prudenti, she was the Chief Administrative Judge of the Courts of New York State. And as Chief Administrative Judge, Judge Prudenti supervised the administration and operation of the entire New York statewide court system with a budget of over $2.7 billion, with 3,600 state and local judges and another 15,000 non-judicial employees working in over 350 court facilities. And so we are so grateful for all that she has done at Hofstra Law School. And with that, I am thrilled to be able to turn the program over to Judge Prudenti.
Thank you, Professor Ostrow. I very much appreciate your really kind introduction. But today, it's my absolute pleasure to start off this program, which I am so excited to not only be a part of, but also to just sit back and watch what, this fabulous panel tell me about the future, the future, the past, the present of Long Island retail and real estate business. But before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about the Wilber F. Breslin Center for Real Estate Studies. One of the highlights of my career as dean has been to be involved with the center. It's named after a gentleman, a charismatic gentleman, and one of Long Island's preeminent real estate developers, Wilber Breslin, who Mr. Breslin dedicated his life and his career to improving Long Island, and I have seen it up close and personal as far as being a native Long Islander. He dedicated his life and his career to improving Long Island and also many other local communities. The Breslin Center was established at Hofstra University in 2007. And with a view and a desire to provide real estate professionals, municipal officials, developers, and the public with information, education, and scholarly analysis of issues that were facing the real estate field. The center, and I have to tell you that my vision for the center was to bring in the very best professors, the very best business people, the very best in the real estate community to become a part of Hofstra Law School. And so I have to admit to you, I was the advocate to President Rabinowitz to ask him if Hofstra Law School could be part. And really be a part of this program to expand programs focusing on land use, zoning, and finance, which are the keys, really keys to success for the major issues on Long Island, such as we all want to see revitalization of downtown areas, and obviously the need for housing in all of our communities on Long Island. And the Breslin Center is designed to meet that need, the need of education and training of attorneys in the complex field of real estate law, offer instruction and foster relationships between the real estate community, professionals, and really to provide, and I think we are doing that, and I think we've seen that under Professor Hofstra's leadership, a center of excellence for interdisciplinary studies of real estate business and law. It responds to a need of attorneys and with the skills and the training to navigate and hopefully help many others to navigate the challenging real estate market. With the resources of the law school, and we have a partnership with the excellent Sabre Business School, the Breslin Center is uniquely positioned to be the leading educational hub, which I believe it is, for our students and the Long Island real estate community. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention, in addition to founding the Breslin Center at Hofstra, Wilber Breslin has played an active role in many significant initiatives at Hofstra University over many years. He has served as a trustee and a trustee emeritus. Hofstra is extremely grateful to Mr. Breslin, not only for his time, energy, and strong commitment, for being the person he is, a charismatic leader and a person who you just love to spend time with, who can tell a story better than anyone else about the history of Long Island real estate development. He has helped make Hofstra a world-class university and Long Island a really, really great place to live, work, and study. And so without further ado, I get to introduce an individual who Hofstra Law holds in the highest regard. He is one of our alumni, and he went to Hofstra Law School not that long ago. He's an alum from the class of 1987. And he is also a member of Hofstra Law's leadership board. And I owe him a personal debt of gratitude for that. He's the president of Breslin Realty Development Corp, and he has held that title for more than 10 years. He founded Breslin Realty, Inc., the brokerage division of Breslin Real Estate Development Corp., and co-founded, along with another one of our panelists, the Sabre Real Estate Group. He serves as a director on the Long Island Real Estate Group and also on the Association for a Better Long Island. Under Wilber and Ken's leadership, Breslin Realty has grown from a small brokerage office to a multifaceted, experienced real estate firm and has developed in excess of 30 retail centers and currently manages over 10 million square feet of commercial real estate in 5 different states. It has represented well over 100 national and regional centers, including amongst them the Home Depot, Stop and Shop, Lowe's Home Improvement, Walmart, TJ Maxx, Trader Joe's, Orange Theory, and Starbucks Coffee. The company's respected reputation and success as one of the area's premier shopping center developments in the tri-state area shows their commitment to not only maximizing profitability, but generating capital appreciation, but improving the community to which they serve. And it is my understanding that Ken, you will be introducing the other panel members. I'd be happy to give them a brief introduction. It's totally up to you.
My My pleasure.
Thank you.
I can do that since you took a lot of the stuff out of my intro, but I'm going to, I really, when I've been on these webinars, it's important that I not bore you at all. I want it to be interesting. We did a prep for this webinar, and it kind of just went by itself, I was happy to say. So I think it will similarly go that way today. I'll start with a little bit of the past. You know, Breslin Realty, where did it start? You know, my dad was selling fruit on Main Street in the village of Hempstead when he said to his dad, Dad, things are going to change. There's supermarkets are coming. They're going to be big. They're going to have all this parking. I think we're in the wrong. And his father said, put the apples up. Make sure they go outside. And my dad finally said, you know, I got to do something else other than sell on Main Street. So he went into the real estate business and he started selling houses. He was pretty good at it. He went from there to selling to leasing gas stations, 7-Elevens. And ultimately, he did his first shopping center in Franklin Square, the King Cullen. I don't know if any you know it, on New Hyde Park Road. And then it was, the rest is history. Today, we manage over 30 centers on Long Island. Wilber has been involved and in many, many residential communities throughout the island. And I think he would be really proud, and one of his proudest things is assembling land and land planning. He was one of the principals involved in the Pine Barrens Preservation Act, which occurred in the mid-90s when he was in a constant challenge and contest with environmental groups, and they settled it through the governor's office. So, today we have evolved. We are evolving every day. The panelists with me today are guys I spend virtually every day with, and I depend on, Wilber depends on, and each of them has stepped up in their way. I'll introduce them first because today's obvious thing to talk about is how's the pandemic affecting our world in the retail real estate world. And it's funny. I was told weeks before it happened, Jason Ciano, who I'll introduce in a little bit, he came to me 2-3 weeks before this all happened, before density reductions, and he said, Kenny, this is going to be big. And I hadn't really bought into it yet. But Jay, yes, you were right. This is really big. And I guess the guy who became our first responder at Breslin was Bob Delaval. He is our director of leasing. So in March, when this all happened, we all asked ourselves, what's going to happen with April's rents? What are we going to do? And it was up to Bob and other office colleagues. Beth Alderman, if you're listening, you should get some credit. But they had to contact every one of our tenants, or try to contact them and try to comfort them in one respect, and also understand what their obligations were. So Bob Delaval, I think I'm going to give you the first crack at discussing how you address the pandemic.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate being able to wear a sport coat for the first time in about 4 months. It's been an interesting time, and I grew up in the retail business, so I think I come to the table with a unique understanding of what was going on in the retailer's head. And obviously, I've been doing this for 35 years on the retail side of real estate, so I kind of know what's going on in the landlord's head. I had to bridge the gap. Clearly, I had a bunch of tenants call me up in the beginning, and I'm thinking, okay, you know what? It's not so terrible. I have maybe 5, 6, 7 people call me up and say, we can't open, and therefore we can't pay the rent. And we dealt with it on a one-off basis with each one. And then all of a sudden, it was like the floodgates. When you're in a rainstorm, all of a sudden you get a couple of drops, and then the next thing you know, you've got the floodgates open and it's pouring. I must have spoken to at least 95% of all of the tenants in our portfolio over the last 3 or 4 months. And what Wilber and I decided early on, or what our team decided early on, was we felt we had an obligation to help these tenants. They are our partners to a certain extent in that, you know, we're in this together. So we decided that we would give them some support. However, the support that they were looking for was kind of opposite of the support that we were willing to give them. You know, our tenants basically, or most of our tenants came to us and said, look, we can't operate and therefore we don't want to pay rent. And my attitude was, I understand you don't want to pay rent, but I think the most important thing for you to understand is you're obligated to pay the rent the same way we're obligated to pay our mortgage. And a lot of landlords in our position don't take typical financing from a bank who is offering forbearances or whatever. We get our financing predominantly from insurance companies. And by getting them from insurance companies, what happens is insurance companies don't really march to the same drummer as the banks. So while we call our lenders and say, look, we're being deluged by tenants that don't want to pay the rent, that can't pay the rent or whatever. And our lenders basically said, that's fine, we understand, and do whatever you can with them, but with one understanding, that you have to pay your mortgage at the end of the month. So Wilber and I sat and we figured out the best thing to do is to offer these tenants deferments, which is exactly what we did. And most of them came around. I think out of the entire portfolio, we may have made drastic deals where we've given a couple of them an abatement of rent. But I'm happy to say that we've probably collected, and Kenny, you can probably verify this too, we've probably collected, or we have promised to collect about 95% of our rents during this time. The interesting thing is how different tenants in the portfolio handle the situation. The truth of the matter is most of the mom and pops don't understand their lease. They've seen their lease once or twice while they were negotiating it with their attorney, and that's it. They really do not understand a lot of times, or they're not sophisticated enough to understand what their lease says and their obligations under the lease. And you know, you've got to walk a tenant through that too, because it's a fearful time for the tenant, especially when all of a sudden nobody's coming into the store or somebody told them that they can't open. This is their livelihood. The more interesting thing is the unique way the national tenants turned to this pandemic and basically said, well, we don't have to pay the rent. And my response was, well, yeah, you do. Well, no, we don't. And I got to tell you, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I heard things that I had never heard before. I mean, I understand force majeure. I understand how it works. It's really not a case. You can't really, you know, hang your hat on force majeure in an event like this, but they tried. David, you'll help me out. Frustration of purpose. Which is something I never really heard of, and I still don't fully understand it. And I've talked to a bunch of attorneys, and it's a practical argument, but not in a case like this. And it's not a practical argument to just not pay your rent for May, June, and July, or April, May, and June. But they tried that. Frustration of purpose, co-tenancy failures. So basically what happened is over time, the tenants got what they wanted. They bought some time. They bought some time to pay their rent, to live up to their rental obligations. My biggest concern and my biggest fear is watching the news every night. Because quite honestly, I don't know what's going to happen if we follow leads like California and Florida, and all of a sudden we kind of revert back and we have more closures. I don't know how many of my tenants are going to be able to survive a second round of closures.
Bob, I think it's interesting to note one of your strategies was we just took some security money to pay rent, and the security money was in fact going to be deferred.
Yeah, you know, it kind of I was looking more to make a tenant comfortable. Tenant has a security deposit. We took it. It made our lenders happy. And we gave them the opportunity to pay it back over 6 months, 12 months, or whatever logical time, worked for the tenant and for us. I'm happy with the result. I'm concerned, and I'm going to turn this back over to Kenny and to Jason, because Jason can also speak about what's going to happen with these retailers as if and when we have a second wave.
All right, I'll grab it. It was 2011, and I was looking for someone to manage our retail brokerage business, because it's a very different business than the development and management world. And I kept seeing people that I didn't love. All of a sudden, one day I get a call from Jason, who had been with me 2 years prior. He was a young broker. We had given a lot of responsibility. And unfortunately, he got picked off by one of the bigger firms. And he left my office one day and he said, "I'm sorry, I got to go. I have reason that I have to go." And I asked him what, and then I understood. We hugged. And I said, "If it doesn't work out, talk to me." So it was 2 years after that, he rings me up and he says, "Kenny, it's not working out. I don't like the environment. I want to do something on our own." I said, "On our own?" He said, "Yeah, on our own." At which point we developed and we gave birth to Sabre Real Estate Group. And the idea of it being wholly independent was good competitively, because, other family owners of shopping centers were a little reluctant to give Breslin Realty, a competitor, signage on their property. So Sabre Real Estate Group was born. Jason is the managing partner of it. And Jason has evolved, and I'm so proud of him for taking the business to a national platform today. Jason sees things way in advance. I'm curious to see what he sees today. He saw that big box work was slowing down, and instead he got very involved in national advisory work. With that said, Jay, please.
Sure. Thank you for the kind introduction. So, the landscape of retail has been changing for a long time. And, when I started with the Breslin family back at the end of 2000, it was a very different environment. And that goes without saying. I focused all my time in the beginning of my career on Long Island, which is my home and my backyard. And I'm very proud to be based in Long Island and continue to have our main office in Garden City. And over time, to Kenny's point, we had to focus on where retail was going and what the definition of retail is. And we've expanded beyond New York and opened an office in New Jersey, and which is a similar demographic, North Jersey to Long Island, and then later on in Manhattan, and built a network of folks across the U.S. I've spent the last month actually traveling a little bit throughout the U.S. because I study consumer behavior, which I think is a very important part of what's going on today. Bob and I, while prepping for this, we're talking about what happens from here and what does the landscape look like. I agree with Bob that it's a very interesting forecast here because we do not know where the hot spots will be in the future. I will say when I left New York at the beginning of June to head down south to Florida, it seemed like nobody really knew what the coronavirus was after experiencing lockdown myself in New York and arriving in Florida. It was kind of scary, honestly, to see how not seriously everybody was taking, social distancing. So today, I'm back in New York and have been for about a week or so, and I'm self-quarantining. But it's not surprising to me why Florida is in the condition that it's in now. And to Kenny's point, I learned a lot about the coronavirus before anybody was paying attention to it. And I've spent a lot of my time over the last 20 years in the business just focusing on the evolution of retail. The retail, what's been happening over the last three months in the pandemic is what I like to call an acceleration of everything that's been happening leading up to the pandemic, since the internet basically arrived and folks started using the internet to shop. So what we're heavily focused on at Sabre is omni-channel retailing and consumer behavior. So, happy to go into that as much or as little as you guys like, but I'd like to say that the inspiration for Kenny and I to start Sabre was really to establish a place, a culture that didn't exist, previous to us. And a lot of what we do is very social media driven. I urge you to check out our social media footprint on all of the various platforms. And I'd like to say that we're innovating in a lot of ways, and I'm happy to discuss that further, but I do not want to hog the microphone. So thank you, Kenny.
Okay. Thank you, Jay. I never thought the big box reign would end, and it has ended. Now, it's all about recreative reuse for properties. We're looking all sorts of different uses, whether it's it was medical and gyms. The gyms have really taken a hit, and restaurants, they've taken a hit too. Now, we're always looking for the next one. Vocational schools is the next one that seems to be getting some momentum. And as well, we have a development business, and the development business, we had started looking at multifamily developments, transportation developments near trains and stuff like that. We, years prior, we had on staff David Orwasher. David Orwasher probably was with us in the, I'm going to say, late 90s, early 2000s. And then he got hired away, and he went and became senior vice president of Starbucks. As such, David was responsible for probably the first 900 stores on the East Coast. David has remained a friend and has recently come back to us and is heading our development world. David, what are you seeing out there?
It's a very interesting question with respect to the pandemic. I've been trained in working in real estate and as an attorney to be observing of both trends and to try to be a modeler and a predictor. And just for a moment, Starbucks at its core is a finance and planning company that engages in understanding consumer behaviors and the larger psychosocial affect. And I think the pandemic has served to accelerate some of the changing consumptive patterns, besides issuing a serious problem to the service retailers, in particular restaurants, in this environment. But I think the big box world and the retail world and the value add perceptions about how people conduct themselves has been changing for some time. And now, we're seeing the acceleration of some of these bankruptcies predicated on the pandemic, but really those trends were in place long before. So the big box retail experience is no longer a value add experience. And I've been focusing a bit of my time over here on asset classes, in particular multifamily, that are responsive to the changing environment. And again, this, I think, is a reflection of the larger environment that overarches over the pandemic, which is the tax environment and how people consume and spend their dollars and live their lives and what they want out of their lives. So the social distancing and the inability to go to retailers, I think it will return, but in a far different way. There are so many people who will not re-engage in that pattern because I don't think it's perceived as the same value add any longer. So that I think is really interesting. Just, for a moment, I'll just digress to the multifamily on Long Island, which you're seeing as a large influx recently. And I think it's a grand reaction to the tax crisis, especially pertaining to millennials and empty nesters. As the real estate tax situation continues to escalate and deductibility and tax laws have changed, the expense is causing migration and disaffection with the embrace of the asset class. So that's what's causing some of this embrace of multifamily development, and we need to continue to evolve. And I think in the just like that's an overarching force within the multifamily environment, and it's also aided on Long Island by the absolute seemingly abandonment from New York City, which I think people are ascribing to the pandemic in large part, but I don't think that's the only cause. So much of it is the tax structure and the other social ramifications of social change, political change, that's changing the physical environment in which people live and operate and consume. So I think that the whole cost benefit, and as reflected in lifestyle, is changing rapidly, and it's affecting real estate. So, one of the other affects over here that we have, at Breslin, I think we're not lucky. I think we're fortunate and planned and smart, and have been a bit less vulnerable to some of the dying retailers, because they're not predominant amongst our portfolio, because we've kind of been ahead of the curve and responsive to that. Those that have clung to it are going to be more vulnerable, especially, again, the value add proposition from the any investment, whether it's residential rent or retail rent. And Bob referenced this earlier, where we're sort of partners, although, I don't know that that's a phrase that would be loved internally, but we charge a price. The retailer charges a price to the consumer. The lender charges a price. There are debt coverage ratios and all kinds of other prophylactic measures to ensure that the money moves around in a profitable capitalistic manner. And when that's jarred, it reverberates across all of those industries, all of those cycles. And that's what we're seeing. In particular, with some of the things that I'm focusing on the multifamily side, that happens to be experiencing a cyclical increase because of all those other factors. But the retail, I think, is experiencing a significant cyclical change, except the cycle is one that we haven't seen before, which is the elimination of classes of assets. But again, there are those of us who are been around long enough to remember when they first started with big box. So to see their demise is not necessarily terminal. Maybe terminal for the big box, but it's not terminal for the category of retail, because it's underpinned with consumption patterns, and we just need to adapt.
David, I want to ask you, with the advent of Grubhub and Uber Eats and all these delivery services, if you were still at Starbucks and looking at the models to do store selection and whatnot, this is a game changer. I mean, I've heard of stores doing 30 and 40% on these deliveries now. They're going to be taking smaller stores. They're going to be needing less seats. It's going to be creating more parking available. So it's a game changer, and the municipalities are going to have to recalculate what parking needs really are for a shopping center. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think you're quite right about what you just said. You know, I think also if sit-down restaurants are going to be maintaining social distancing for a longer period of time, maybe even permanently, unless they develop some ultraviolet light that's safe to consumption that can kill viruses. And if they have their space, it's going to create, I think, opportunity for larger aggregated kitchens and delivery and pickup arenas. So that's a repurposing of the physical real estate assets. At Starbucks, again, you know, they're really very rigorous in constant reassessment and self-assessment. So, you know, they're behaving opportunistically, some may say predatorily, in another vein, in shedding elements of their portfolio where on a forward basis they would see decline in sales because they were physically rooted in so many of the developed stores which were focused around the third place and intimate congregation within small spaces. You know, the third place, the vaunted third space that Howard made so ever prevalent.
The third place, not home, not work, the third place.
That's right, where people can be quote unquote alone together. It's almost become a cliche at this point. And right in front of our eyes, it's becoming a health issue. So the company has announced its pivot. I think they're a harbinger of the future and very astute in that they're recasting their portfolio to be drive-through and pickup only, consolidating units. And as you see migration out of dense urban environments and office environments, which is another part of this unsolved yet pandemic, what's going to be the effect on the office environments on a go-forward basis? How many more people are on a permanent basis going to be working from home or alternate commuting? The WeWork model.
I am.
Yes. So I think it has just a cascading effect. Retail is I think, the most obvious front edge of the effects of this and whether it will be long lasting. Clearly in Florida, in Texas, and, you know, I imagine this will be everywhere else. People are social animals and, you know, they want to congregate and they want to attend events and they want to dine together. You know, so I think the level of return to that, I think, will be accomplished, but I think the reverberating effect will be the cost equations, the rent chargeable, the sales doable, the operating expenses of the retailers, of the office environment, all of that. I think that's in for a considerable shift. And as some of my colleagues, Jay and Bob and you, have all said, you know, in these kind of cataclysmic events, these changing events, the weak are kind of flushed out of the system. And, you know, things that may be less desirable real estate, and less desirable real estate means it's not appealing to the consumer, so they don't pay the rent, they don't do the sales, they can't pay the rent. The games are changing.
Yeah, David, on that note, let me ask.
I think what David said is absolutely correct. I think the scary thing here is that, you know, most retailers that have been in business for years and years and years they've got the ability to rest on the data that they've collected over their years in different situations. You know, they know what the summer is going to bring. They know what the fall is going to bring. They know what's going to happen, you know, if this happens or if that happens. They're in such uncharted territories here. They've got no data to fall back on to address how to move forward from this. So it's going to be a learning curve. And I think while, you know, it sounds like a lot of doom and gloom here, it's not. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the good retailers to basically regroup, to shed, and we talked about this the other day on the phone, to use this as an opportunity. There's always a stigma with filing for bankruptcy. There's always a stigma in closing stores. All of a sudden, this pandemic, if a retailer plays their cards correctly, can use this pandemic as an excuse to do what it would typically, take the legal tools such as bankruptcy or whatever to use. So they'll shed the stores that are non-profitable, and that's not terrible. You know what? Because they just because they made a mistake in choosing demographics for that one location, that location is now going to be good for somebody else. So it's really just a question of weeding out, but it's not doom and gloom.
Yeah. I'm going to dovetail over to Jason, because Jason was telling me stories. He represents dozens of tenants he's doing crisis management for. And Jay, what kind of things have you been up against, and are interesting for us to note? There's going to be a lot of good business done for these retailers during this. Go,
Yeah,
Jay.
for sure. So I do want to note that Kenny and I represent Starbucks Coffee exclusively on Long Island since 2003. And we've done collectively about 150 locations between New York and New Jersey in that time frame. In 2003, around the same time, I also was traveling in LA visiting friends, discovered a concept called Chipotle, later brought that concept to New York through Long Island, and designed their strategy and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm saying that because my acute eye for figuring out what's unique in concepts, after that, European Wax Center in many states across the US. And then from there, Orange Theory Fitness from the first location. The list goes on. And at this point, Sabre's doing that on a national basis with the founders or the C-suite executives and advising them on their entire business and how to thrive when markets change, and how to more or less design your strategy based on that. What the biggest challenge is, to answer your question, Kenny, is it's the trickle up effect, right? Which is a very common conversation that I'm having with the tenants that we work with. If a restaurant or a gym or anything that we consider to be a retail use is only allowed to operate at a 30 or 50% capacity, the pro forma that they used to decide what rent they can pay at that location is out the window, right? The minute that a restaurant can come back and only operate at 50%, they simply can't afford to pay their rent. So the biggest problem right now, and why it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, is that deferment is a short-term solution to a major problem, because you have, like I said, the trickle up effect. You have tenants who can't afford to pay their rent. You have landlords who can't afford to eat the rent. And you have lenders who are, looking to the government for support. And that's really where I see the biggest challenge moving forward, because it's not about the tenant not wanting to pay rent. It's about whether or not they can pay rent. And that's the biggest challenge that I see moving forward. From a specific tenant standpoint, we represent a lot of tenants in that have locations in New York City and LA and Miami and Chicago, high street locations paying premium rents. And, at this point in time, we're having discussions with their landlords to figure out a unique solution that's fair for all parties. And that's the biggest challenge, because once you get past tenants who can afford to pay their rent are happy to do it. If you have a tenant that is not open for business, let's just use gyms as an example, because we represent some of I'd say the majority of the premium boutique fitness concepts across the US. At Sabre, we represent in some geography. And in Florida, they have been operating all the way through this crisis. In New York, they've been closed since, mid-March, and there's no sign of them opening. They're not even on the phase 4 opening plan. So how is any gym, any Orange Theory, any, you name it, how are they going to open back up and not only pay the rent that they're supposed to pay at 100% capacity when their business wasn't interrupted, but also pay on top of that the rent that they owe their landlords for the 3, 4, who knows, 6 months that they owe.
I have an example. I was talking to Y7 is a yoga boutique fitness place, and they said, Kenny, we typically have 28 mats on the floor. In the city, given that I can't be in touch with anyone 6 feet on either side, that's a 12-foot radius. I'm down to, from 28 mats, I'm down to 8 or 9 mats.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
even if they can open and they have 8 or 9 mats, it's a fundamental change. They're not going to be able to pay rent. They're going to have to make decisions, and relocations are going to occur as a consequence, and resetting of rents. It's going to be.
Absolutely. And to piggyback onto that, Kenny, it's way bigger than that, because this forced experiment that we all were forced into in March has changed consumer behavior and habits. Bob used a great example. I don't love the example because we represent Starbucks. We're Starbucks partner, but Bob brought up, you know, if I went to Starbucks 2 times a day in my normal routine prior to being on lockdown, you know, am I going to go back to Starbucks? Am I going to, you know, get back into that routine and that habit? And quite honestly, I think humans forget pretty fast, and I'm noticing that and witnessing that already. But Kenny, the bigger issue is that in the fitness industry, you have these coaches and these trainers that are paid a lot of money at boutique fitness concepts that, you know, have helped them become celebrities through social media and other platforms, that are making more money with their laptop and Venmo at home than they are when they're teaching a class for Y7 or Barry's Boot Camp or Soul Cycle. And that's created a completely different platform for these people to go out and make more money than they were previously. So take that into effect, take the unemployment factor into effect when you have people who are collecting $600 through the end of July that are just taking that money and not going back to work, and everything else that's happening.
Questions.
Yeah, I wonder if I could jump in, because I know we're going to run out of time. And so actually, I have a bunch of questions, but I guess one of them is, you've all mentioned that the pandemic has perhaps accelerated a trend in retail that was occurring long before, kind of since the advent of the internet and certainly Amazon. And I'm just curious about it, if you could talk a little bit more about what was going on with big box. And also, if you've noticed, which I did, that during the pandemic, the lines to get into Walmart and Target were hours long. So I can order as much as I want off the Target website, and in fact, they'll still deliver it to me, often within hours. And there was something about being in a physical store, about being in Target and being able to browse products, that was very appealing. So much that I think a lot of people were willing to risk, you know, whatever exposure to COVID in order to be able to do that. And so I'm just curious how that plays into some of what you're predicting, you know, some of what you have said occurred in the past, and then are also predicting trends in the future.
Well, I got a great one. I mean, my son Justin, who I'm sure is listening, and some of you know,
Yes.
He's always coming up with ideas. And one of his ideas during this thing is like, Dad, this curbside pickup could be a big game changer. And I poo-pooed him a little bit, but then he went into more detail and he researched it. And there are curbside companies that are going to landlords, getting licenses on shopping centers, and they are representing the shopping centers. They're creating identifiable spaces in lots, and the goods are basically being called for, and it's coming out to spot maybe A3. I thought that was a really interesting thing. I think that's a real game changer. And as David, you said in prep, you know, I don't know if any of you remember service merchandise stores. Anybody? Or consumers, distributors? You know, in those days, it was the showroom. You know, you'd look through the showroom, you'd find, you'd touch, you'd feel, and it would be sent to you. So retailing is changing. We've never seen a fundamental change like it's going to change right now. And between curbside and, you know, management of goods, they don't all have to be at store level. Stores don't have to carry that much inventory anymore. So the 90,000 foot store is going to be 40,000 feet. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, to piggyback onto that, there are a lot of smart companies out there that have seen the evolution and are, ahead of it. A lot of direct to consumer brands obviously have opened up brick and mortar locations, and those brick and mortar locations actually prop up their internet sales, right? So we're well aware of all of that. But the reality is today that not every town or neighborhood needs a Gap or a Banana Republic. So, a lot of these concepts like Bonobos, Untuckit, Warby Parker, it's more of the showrooming concept where you're going in, you're trying your stuff on, and you're, ordering it online, even in the store, leaving without a shopping bag, and it's being shipped directly to your house. So, Amazon is the most obvious company to talk about. I saw a question in the chat box about the repurposing of real estate, things of that nature. It's why you see Amazon looking at AMC to possibly acquire their portfolio, looking at JCPenney, right? Because they're looking at distribution, and they are the definition of, the future of retailing, and how they can use the different businesses that they acquire, like Whole Foods, as drop shipping points. And the logistics from there are going to continue. So, I think it's going to change the landscape of neighborhoods. The malls are going to have a really big challenge ahead of them, because they've also been dated in nature. And, once you see department stores closing for good, you're going to have to find really interesting entertainment use concepts to fill those larger boxes, or you're going to have a lot of dead space that nobody can occupy, and nobody at a mall wants a dead anchor.
Yeah,
you're right, Jay. But what that does is it kind of gives rise to, and we all know that the real estate business is cyclical. So you know what? The malls were prevalent, and then all of a sudden, the street centers, the shopping centers, the regional highway shopping centers kind of had a downturn. Now you're going to have just the opposite. I think now you're going to find a lot of the mall tenants. Look, national tenants can't close stores. They have to answer to Wall Street. All right. So they have to maintain their presence. They have to maintain stores. Now, if they're not making money in the malls anymore because people are afraid to go into the malls, they don't know whether the air conditioning is going to filter out whatever viruses there are in the air. What's the logical alternative? The logical alternative now is to come back to the strip center. So,
or not open retail stores at all, like Nike.
Well, I think you almost have to, because human nature, we're tactile. We like to be able to go in. We like to be able to touch things. We like to try things on. Nobody likes to get something from Amazon and then have to ship it or bring it back to Kohl's or here or there or wherever to ship it back because it didn't fit or whatever. You prefer to have it. You're going someplace for a weekend. You're not going to take a chance of ordering something on Amazon. It's going to come on Friday and it's not going to fit. Okay. So I think people will ultimately always want to shop in a brick and mortar store. I think to a certain extent, the trends will change. And I think the percentage that they do in brick and mortar is going to differ. And I agree with you. There's probably going to be a huge amount of downsizing. But you know what? Downsizing, it's like kicking the can. So the larger tenant moves to the smaller space. The larger tenant moves to the larger space. So you're going to have a consistent weeding back in of vacant real estate. Again, I don't like the doom and gloom. It's been tough. But I think this is an opportunity for anybody wanting to enter into this business, as to see this time as an opportunity.
I wonder if can I just also follow up on that, because we're almost out of time. Human memory is very short, and I think we can see that already in the city, right? So we're all just coming out of lockdown and everybody's in the parks and there's less mask wearing. I mean, people forget very, very quickly. Let's hope on the optimistic side that we do have a vaccine, within the next year or 2 years. What do you think is going to be permanent, right? Will the gyms open back up again? Is that something that, people do want to go work out with other people? I mean, are there some, people do want to eat out, I think, people want to be social in some way. So some of the businesses that are struggling now, do you think they might have a revival if they can hang on through this period?
I think, I'm sorry. There is going to be a revival. I was out at Lamani last Wednesday night, and you know what? It felt really good. It felt really normal.
It
Gyms
did,
are.
but didn't you feel uncomfortable to a certain extent? Because I did the same thing on Friday night, and you know what?
I
It
didn't.
was in the back of my mind. Do I really want to be
I
here?
didn't feel uncomfortable. I made a Caribbean vacation plan for November, thinking and hoping that it goes. And I think the question is gyms and things like that are going to have to evolve. Jason represents a gym called Solid Core. He told me they were built for this. As it turned out, you know, they have Pilates machines every 6, 8 feet. You stay on that machine for your whole hour there. There's no, you're not going, it's not circuit training. And I think more gyms are going to have to evolve towards that way. A guy like Orange Theory Fitness, which was based upon circuit training, they're going to have to refigure it.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback onto that as well, you know, the fitness industry will be in better shape than they are now. Everybody realizes how mortal they are. They want to be as healthy as possible. However, it doesn't mean that Orange Theory Fitness with 1,700 locations across the world is going to continue their track record to be able to say they've never closed a studio. They're absolutely going to close studios. Peloton is crushing a lot of these companies. Lululemon acquired Mirror on Monday of this week. So I will just warn everybody that's paying attention to this discussion that this is not a recession. This is the cycle. I agree. This is the cycle. And every 10 years, we know there's ebbs and flows. And we all know that different concepts live past their expiration. Those concepts that were weak leading into this pandemic are now gone or going away. A lot of the same names that we've heard forever, JCPenney, Pier 1, J. Crew, GNC, the list goes on. I'll be honest, I'm not going to miss many of those. I think they're past their expiration date, and it's time for something new to come in and innovate. And I think that we'll see a lot of very interesting, new and unique concepts come out of this.
Agree.
So-
Look at that as an opportunity as well. I mean, now you have all of these tenants that are moving out. The problem, what you're gonna have another situation. Let's take it from the other end. Now you've got the real estate that all of these tenants are moving out of. You're going to have landlords that are not going to be able to survive. They're going to have to. There will be bargain basement opportunities in real estate as well. And so there will be people out there being able to take advantage of that and making money based on somebody else's unfortunate demise.
Yeah. So I want to interject because we are actually out of time, but I'm happy that we ended on somewhat of a positive note in that, yes, this is a difficult time. And yet if you are optimistic and resourceful, there are so many opportunities to create wealth and to innovate, I think, as you are all saying. And, you know, it is sort of an exciting time in real estate to kind of really help shape the world and see, you know, how are we going to advance? Real estate is always, I mean, we live on this earth, we need physical spaces. And so real estate is always going to be, you know, a tremendous resource and valuable. And so, you know, I think it's exciting, you know. As you said, it's terrible because some people are going to suffer, and yet there are opportunities, I think, for growth.
As my dad said, he can smell the opportunities today.
Thank you. I think that's the perfect ending for this. And I really just want to thank all of you for being here. Your expertise is just phenomenal, and I think everybody really benefited and appreciated from it. So thank you all, and thank you to all of our attendees. And yeah, the recording of this will be available. So if anyone wants to go back and
I'm just glad we had the content.
What?
I'm just glad we had the content.
Yes, you did. Absolutely. Thank you all very much. I'm going to sign off and thank everyone.